So I think that all non-Indigenous peoples, in the Australian context, who are trying to do work and research in Indigenous communities or about Indigenous peoples need to understand first, why are they doing that research? Is that research of benefit to Indigenous peoples for their betterment, or is it for the betterment or the career progression of the actual researcher? So my point would be, first, is there actually a need and a benefit to the Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous communities? Next, I would say to make sure that research does no harm, because as Linda Tuari-Smith has said quite strongly in her work, in her seminal book, Decolonising Methodologies, that, research is a dirty word for Indigenous peoples because of the abuse that's come and the negative outcomes that have been there for Indigenous peoples. So in doing, for non-Indigenous peoples, working and wanting to do Indigenous researchers, I think that they need to, first of all, know that they are doing research with Indigenous peoples, not for or about Indigenous peoples. So that's one position. My second take would be, I don't think in Australia there should be any need for any non-Indigenous researcher to be doing Indigenous research without a co-researcher who is Indigenous in this day and time. There's plenty of Indigenous researchers who have expertise in all fields now, where they should be included at all levels of a research project. So that's a really solid thing for me in terms of an expectation. I would also say that non-Indigenous researchers need to know their own positionality in this research. And that's more than just saying, yes, I recognise I'm a non-Indigenous person and I have privilege. It's about knowing how their position is, what their positioning is in terms of, power, and where they are in their actual, role and position within this research project.
The co-production on the rating, right? So I think that's a disruptor in itself. I think universities maybe holding some type of talks where lived experience and researchers, lecturers and students can get together and start unpicking some of this stuff would be another one. The use of audio,
Yes.
and when I say audio, it could be through a podcast platform, but you could basically have those voices of lived experience of students and or researchers in one space, openly debating, discussing, or talking about said issues, whatever they may be, mental health, criminal, whatever that may be. That disrupts because it brings people together who would never normally be in the same space. They're all ways in which I see disruption currently, but could be definitely grown upon.
I was angry because I wanted to do an interview. There was a big project that was happening, but because I was on license, I wasn't allowed to do it because he told me that they couldn't get through the ethics board. I was on license because basically I was still property of the state. And I hated the fact that I wasn't in a bad place mentally at that point. Well, I was probably more than I am now, but I was certainly able to take part in that, and I wanted to, and I certainly had the knowledge and the emotion and the drive to be able to do it, and I wasn't allowed to. I often feel that vulnerability is used by the state as a way to control people. When you're on life license, or when you're on when you're trapped in the system, you can't get out. So I was hindered so much by these guidelines that say they were protecting me, when really they're protecting themselves. They're protecting their own interests and control and law and order, and they don't want information to be spread.
In Australia, in Australian universities, all Indigenous research has to go through ethics committees. But my concern is that they go through all these processes and address thousands of questions, which to me has become a tick the box exercise, because once they get approved, they go and do that research. But there's no institutional follow-up to actually hold them accountable for what research is actually being done. So unless somebody makes a formal complaint, nobody really knows whether this ethics is being followed. Ethics committees have been put into place for a reason, because of a history of abusive research being done by non-Indigenous researchers. I did yarning sessions with them about their experiences as educators in that field and trying to understand what racial literacy looks like across Australia. And as that became a project of joy, but also a project of solidarity, which led to the development of a co-edited book from that project, which consists of 22 chapters written by 28 authors from a variety of backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Also with that, we are holding a number of sessions throughout Australia where all of those different authors are coming together to discuss their chapters, you know, in community forums and some university forums.
So I think kind of diversifying it and like leaning into more visual ways of communicating knowledge. I think this is an example where it's really, really beneficial to disabled groups, neurodiverse groups, but I think it's also beneficial to everybody as well. I think it's one of those examples where inclusion benefits everyone. So yeah, thinking about different ways of being creative. And I think as well, I mean, it's a stereotype that neurodiverse people are really, really creative, but some of them are really creative. So why not use that in the way we communicate the knowledge production, sharing their experiences firsthand? Because I think it can be really powerful to do that. So yeah, and I think as well the way society is going, we're so all of our attention span is reduced, and people don't want to sit and read long things.